Why are they so stupid? It's a great question. I think that the
A lot of things happen right now very quickly in the United States, but the last thing was this peace talk of Putin and Trump, the so-called. What do you say about that?
well, I think that it's very clear that there's no strategy that the United States is implementing. It's just trying to rapidly end the war. The Russians do have a strategy, on the other hand, which is to not give up anything. So far, the Russians have made no concessions that we know of. They showed no signs of being interested in doing what the United States wants to do, no matter how the U.S. tries to spin this. And I think that this all sort of proves what we knew months ago, which is that the Russians don't want to end this. The Russians do want to continue waging war. And this is why I think that Donald Trump so totally misinterpreted Zelensky's strong resistance to doing any negotiations with the Russians, because Zelensky said they don't want peace. They want to continue waging
Yes.
war.
Yeah.
And I don't know how the White House had the idea that, well, we'll force you, we're going to cut off the weapons, we'll cut off the intelligence, and you'll be forced to negotiate. It was never a question if the Ukrainians could negotiate. It was a question if the Russians would be willing to. And we see at this point, they're very clearly not willing to. And the U.S., keep in mind, just gave away one concession after another. When you
Mhm.
look at the NATO membership and other things, it just makes no sense whatsoever. But that's the current state of affairs.
Yeah, Jay, let me tell this from a standpoint of a German. I'm in the middle of Europe now, and we all the time have this word peace in our heads. And all the time, if somebody mentions peace, everybody will all of a sudden stick to it. But the experience shows that the Russians are lying and lying and attacking and attack. Why are the people so stupid and don't just act as they should?
Why are they so stupid? It's a great question. I think that the reality is that, there's a lot going on. I think that the White House itself, as I said, doesn't have a clear plan. There's not great negotiators working on this. We have Mr. Wickoff, who's a real estate developer, who's charged with a lot of the negotiations, which is quite alarming. As far as I know, he has no background whatsoever in diplomacy or anything else related to Russia or Ukraine. Um, but he's the one in charge of this. And it's going to make things hard. I think that they just don't realize what they're getting into. They think that this is sort of like a difficult negotiation about a real estate transaction, and it's not. It's
Mhm.
far more complicated.
Yeah.
And the fact that they don't appreciate this is worrisome. The fact that they don't appreciate the fact that the United States probably should not be the one negotiating this if it's not going to be the country that's going to send peacekeepers. So just imagine this. If we have an agreement tomorrow, there will have to be enforcement of the agreement, one, but there's also going to be an element of that enforcement, which is the peacekeepers. If the United States is not going to be sending those, it means the Europeans are. And if the Europeans are sending them, how can the United States be negotiating it with the Russians without the Europeans as to what peace negotiators who will be coming from Europe will be
Yeah.
doing? It just
Yeah.
doesn't make any sense, right? So
Absolutely.
let's imagine that they say, okay, we're not going to have peacekeepers. We're just going to do what? Trust the Russians to stay on their side of this? That also makes no sense whatsoever. So what is the actual meaning of all this negotiation? It fundamentally, at the very bottom of it, doesn't make sense to me. I quite literally do not understand where they're trying to take this. So the U.S. won't send the peacekeepers. The Europeans maybe won't send the peacekeepers at all. Maybe they will. Nobody's really sure. But either way, it's been negotiated without the involvement of the Europeans.
Yeah, but if you watch, if you see the war, how it is, the full scale war, how it is was going on. In the beginning, the Ukrainians have been attacked all of a sudden, and then they fought bravely. And those days, in the first 3 weeks, the people thought they will fall in 3 days, but they didn't. The Ukrainians were brave, and then the Western allies started to support, always too little, too late. But now the Ukraine is still so bravely fighting, and what we lost a lot of time. We lost a lot of time, and the United States changed now the sides all of a sudden, also because Trump came into power, which is horrible. And and now Europe is all alone. What advice would you give to Europe here?
Well, it's very clear that the Europeans should not be relying on the United States for anything, not just about Ukraine, but I think for their own security as well. Uh, it's it's challenging to imagine why Donald Trump has decided to start his presidency only 2 months so far by immediately putting tariffs on Canada and Mexico, talking about Greenland's annexation as well as Panama Canals being retaken over,
Sure.
starting trade wars with the European Union, questioning NATO, already talked about cutting troops in Europe, pulling out of Ukraine essentially, and at the same time we see he's talked very, very, very little about being tough with China, which he, has something about China. He's always said he's going to really stand up to them. Well, he's not really doing much. Iran, he always talked about. He didn't really do much with Iran. Okay, Russia, he doesn't view it to be a threat for whatever reason. But the other countries, why isn't he doing anything? Why is he so focused on going after our allies? And of course, I think that everybody understands why he would want to have better trade deals. Okay, that's fine. Then you go and say we want to renegotiate the trade deals. The surpluses aren't working. That's fine. But just go do that. Why do you have to shake over the entire board so that at this point everything's destabilized? I don't know how that's helped in any way the U.S.'s national security. And economically, the U.S. markets lost about $5 trillion in 2 weeks. It's more than 2 times the GDP of Russia. So it's obviously not working out well for us economically. So
Mhm.
it's very hard to imagine where this is going in the long term.
I agree totally. This is for me as a European, I have the feeling that we have to do the things now in the moment alone. Wait for a miracle that Trump will be overthrown one day again. What do you think about NATO, the state of NATO? How is the state of NATO, and can we still rely on them?
I mean, I think that NATO still functions as an organization, and it'll continue to function as an organization. But I don't know to which limits that would come. I mean, I can easily imagine Donald Trump doing just like what he said, which is, if a country's attacked and it has not been paying its 2%, that he would say, no, that's not a good investment of the US tax dollars
I
to go
agree.
help them. So we're not going to. I can imagine that. I mean, I can really imagine that.
Yeah,
If he viewed it to be something that was a direct threat to the US or to US interest, very clear interest, I mean, very direct, not linear. I mean, attack on NATO is a threat to US interest, but I think that's a little too distant for him. I think that it'd have to be something quite specific, where he'd say, "Oh, like Britain has been attacked by a foreign country." Then I could see, him having a different opinion. But when it comes to just the hypothetical of if you're Lithuania today, should you feel secure? I wouldn't. I mean, I would absolutely not. And I don't think the Russians, to be fair, will invite Lithuania anytime soon. But I do think that, for their own purposes, if their biggest bet was NATO will take care of us, that's probably not the right bet to have.
if I would imagine how Putin feels, I think for him everything works 100 times better than he could always imagine. This is just some bad dream which is going on here. But the Ukrainians, they have to fight it in the middle of all that. But when they say they would take control of Zaporizhzhia power plant, what does this mean actually?
So it would likely mean if it's Zaporizhzhia power plant, given its location under Russian occupation, being on the east side of the Dnipro River, it would probably mean that they would recognize or at least accept Russian occupation of that section of the country. Of course, it's very alarming. It's a very important power plant too, so Ukraine can't afford to be without it. But it would appear at this point that the White House is considering different options of dividing up Ukraine and giving it to Russia. It's a very strange scenario. It's an incredibly strange scenario, considering especially that once again the European countries do not recognize this. Turkey does not recognize this. Turkey, if we look at the country or look at the peninsula of Crimea, it's absolutely sort of absurd. Turkey does not want to see Crimea go back to Russia.
Mm-hmm.
It would take away its influence in the Black Sea,
Mm-hmm.
which is tremendously important to its national interest.
Mm-hmm.
And so I don't know how the U.S. is doing this, thinking that things will just turn out okay. The U.S. and Russia might recognize this as being the official boundaries of Russia, but other countries, like no other civilized country, will. They'll all say what it is. It's an illegal occupation. So the
Yeah.
U.S. has now put itself in an incredibly complicated situation, which I don't know how to get out of. There's not a peace deal. There's not going to be a peace deal because in the eyes of all the European countries, there's not peace in Ukraine.
When the peace, so-called peace, would be there, this would be just be a capitulation. This would be Minsk 3. When we had Minsk 1 and Minsk 2, this was just the same thing. And the Ukrainians have been forced to agree to some strange peace deal, which was no peace. And that's why now we know better. So let's keep the Ukrainians fighting. And they should fight, but not only alone. I think that the European Union now must make something like a NATO, a new NATO without the United States, and that we should support with all our troops Ukraine and make them win. And then Russia would be screwed. Do you agree to that?
I agree. I think that the reality is we have to understand that Russia at this point has realized the weak point in this equation is the United States. That's quite obvious.
For
The
the moment.
Europeans have not backed down. The Europeans have been strong. The French and the British, especially, have made a lot of very strong statements recently
Hmm.
that show that they're very committed to this.
Hmm.
It's quite unfortunate that the United States, the leader in NATO, has decided to be the one that runs away.
Yeah.
This is not a country that's easy to get along with without. This is not, if Portugal decided not to come to the meeting, we wouldn't know what to do. The United States plays the central role. And to be without that is complicating things. But it's also stupid, I think, for another reason, which is that it's hurting the United States in the long run. The U.S. sells tons of weapons every year to European countries, to other countries, allies around the world. But at this stage, who really wants to buy American if you're not sure what they're going to do tomorrow? They're not reliable.
Yeah,
And being
of course.
reliable was probably the most important thing. So if you're
Yeah.
no longer a reliable partner, you're really endangering your interest. And that's something that won't just go away. I mean, even if, let's imagine 3 months from now, Donald Trump says, I've thought about it, we're going to help Ukraine. Great. But there's always going to be that doubt if he's going to do, decide on you next time that, oh, so we're not going to help you, or we're not going to sell you the weapons, or we're not going to sell you the parts. So why would you want to be involved with the American defense industry?
Of course, this causes big, huge damage for the United States, and but all of us are we have to deal. We cannot look into the future and ask them, would you please be reasonable again? No, we have to really make actions. And now it's, I guess, only Ukraine and Europe is left over, and we have to do it on our own. And we had tried to convince you also in the United States to come back on board, but for the moment doesn't work. So this is,
I mean, it's a very complicated situation. It doesn't look like it's going to get better soon.
yeah.
So it's all getting very complicated very fast.
But I want to really thank you so much that you had time for this short interview. It was great talking to you and to know your expertise.
Nice to
And
meet you as well, Christoph.
all the best, Jake. And
Awesome. Great
yeah,
talking to you. Thanks for
thank,
supporting Ukraine. Take care.
thanks a lot. Take
Bye
care too.
bye.
Bye bye.